About 50 years ago, an astronaut returning from the moon experienced things that he couldn't find a scientific explanation for. So, with some colleagues, he launched a new science focused on the mind and how it works in the body and across space and time. It's the field of Noetics, where the tools of modern science are used to help us understand how what we think and feel affects us and the world around us. Now, this is Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments from the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon.
You found Noetic Moments, the show that explores the research addressing what consciousness is, what it does, how it works, and how our lives could be very different if we understood it better. I am Ruth Miller, a longtime student of consciousness, cybernetics, and culture, and through this series of programs, I'm introducing some of the people whose work has defined this field of research and explaining some of their ideas and experiments. I'll also explore some relevant news items and answer questions that you send to my email address, ruth@noeticmoments.org. Well, over the course of these programs, we've looked at some of the models developed to explain our mental and emotional experience and the experiments that have supported them. We've learned that, although the medical world defines consciousness as what we're aware of now, most of what goes on in the mind is not in our conscious awareness at all, but goes on in unconscious processes. From Jung and Freud and other early researchers, we learned that our minds can be thought of as having three aspects: what we are aware of, our personal awareness, which is usually called the conscious mind; what we aren't aware of that keeps our bodies going and includes our fears and beliefs about threats and dangers, the subconscious mind; and what we aren't aware of that connects us and guides us in our actions, the individual superconscious mind. We then learned that we can change our state of consciousness and shift which aspects of mind we are aware of and what we're capable of in the moment. From neuroscientists, we learned that the brain modifies whatever it receives from the bodily senses and from the mind to fit past patterns of experience. This follows Begg's principle that neurons that fire together wire together, and they form what's called the default network in the brain. All this means that we see and hear and feel what we expect, or believe we will, experience. We also learned that while it's possible to say where in the brain various processes are active at any given moment, no one has yet been able to pinpoint where memories are stored or how ideas and thoughts are formed. We then saw that many responses in our body happen faster than nerve impulses or chemicals can travel through the body, and they often show up in the body before we're aware of it. As a result, many scientists have come to accept that what we call mind is not the product of the electrochemical activity of the brain, but is in fact the activity of a field that surrounds and permeates the whole body. The brain, then, is best understood as a receiver-transmitter, receiving messages from the mind and transmitting those to the body, and receiving messages from the senses and transmitting them to the rest of the body and the mind. Some experiments have demonstrated that a person's mind continues to perceive and process for as much as several hours, even when the brain and heart are flatlined, and the person has been declared dead. All of this, then, leads us to understand mind as a field, a pattern of energy that exists regardless of whether the body is functioning, that permeates and develops with the body and the brain, as it is told by the senses through the brain what the body's experiences of the world is like. The field we call mind appears to be at least partly electromagnetic because it's possible to measure electromagnetic activity for several inches and even several feet around the body. And some researchers and teachers of ancient traditions, who we call shamans, say that that field looks like a glowing egg shape, extending from below our knees to a few inches above our heads. Now, every field is a unique pattern of vibrations that's different from other fields, And some experiments have demonstrated that minds can vibrate along similar patterns. They resonate with each other. Their bodies, and some of the pets' bodies that belong to those people with those minds, have been measured as changing when someone they're connected with simply turns attention their way, even though they can't be seen or heard. These experiments help explain how the belief of a care provider in a treatment can help a patient receiving that treatment experience healing, what's called the placebo effect. We've learned that mind affects energy and matter in a variety of other ways. For example, in the famous double-slit experiments in quantum physics, the subatomic building blocks of the universe show up as energy or matter, depending on whether a mind is present to observe them. For decades now, individuals have changed the patterns of numbers in what should be random grids on their computer screens or printouts, and the collective human mind changes those readouts from a series of random number generators on the network of computers run by the Global Consciousness Project in Princeton. Because of the nature of fields and because of things like the Global Consciousness Project, a growing number of scientists are seeing our individual field of mind as part of a larger field, a collective consciousness, or noosphere, or global brain. And more, scientists are equating mind with the quantum or zero-point field out of which all matter and energy arises, some calling it the Akashic field. We also heard from folks who are using the equations of quantum mechanics, relativity, and computer learning algorithms to describe the role of consciousness in the formation of matter. With these understandings, we explored some popular ideas about consciousness, including the law of attraction, how the world around us mirrors what our consciousness is focusing on, how we access information in the quantum or Akashic field through insight, intuition, and channeling, how dreams affect the body and consciousness, and how music affects the brain and the body, and our connections with other minds' fields. The role of mind and our state of consciousness in the healing process, and how we can enhance or slow down healing processes through our thoughts, emotions, and visualizations. How remote viewing works, and how we can get into a state of flow in which the mind and the brain are in such sync that they maximize our effectiveness. You can catch up on our past shows on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where you'll also find links to the clips and books and authors that I refer to on the show. Now today, I'd like to shift gears a little bit. We'll still touch on some of the amazing discoveries going on in the brain research, but there's something even more amazing happening that I feel called to share with you. It's Memorial Day weekend, the end of May 2023, and I've just returned to the Oregon coast from a 2-week tour of the British Isles by car, bus, and ship. A couple of my students and I were able to carve out the time and make it happen, so we did. Although we didn't make it to northern England, we were able to visit several cities along the south coast, as well as Liverpool and London, and to spend a couple days in Scotland, in the big city of Edinburgh and a small fishing town, as well as touring the cities of Belfast and Dublin, the countryside around them, and the small port that used to be known as Queenstown, but is once more known by its ancient name of Cove. In the process, we encountered people from over a dozen countries around the world, and I was able to have extended conversations with some of them, as well as with the folks living in the places we visited. And all I've got to say is, wow. First of all, there's the fact that all these people from all these places working and living together in such a small geographic area. The total landmass of the whole British Isles is just over 120,000 square miles, which is only 20% more than the state of Oregon, which is about 99,000 square miles. And the population of the British Isles, approaching 70 million people, is over 20 times that of Oregon, at about 3.5 million people. And virtually all of those people are concentrated in large cities and densely populated smaller towns scattered across the islands, on which enough food is grown to feed 10 times the population of the islands and is sold to other countries. The second thing that was pretty amazing is the awareness of the larger world around them. The people we encountered had full understanding of political and social issues as well as natural and ecological ones that I don't often hear in the U.S. But most of all, there's the openness, the willingness to care about people simply because they are people, to explore differences rather than fight against them, and to embrace what is held in common. In short, we experienced a much higher level of consciousness among the people of the British Isles than anywhere I've been in the United States, outside of a very few academic and high-tech communities. To share a few examples, the driver from Yemen, who has rediscovered his Muslim faith after having explored several other traditions, sees clearly that although the teachings of Jesus have been lost to most Christians, they really are the core of a spiritual life. Or the Irish and Scottish towns with churches that dominate the landscape and everyone points to with pride, regardless of whether they are Catholic or Protestant. The 3 boys we saw walking home from school along a country road in Northern Ireland, 2 wearing the blazers of a Catholic school and 1 of a Protestant school, their arms around each other, laughing and waving at our bus going by on that narrow road. And the group of women from Jamaica who embraced us and laughed with us every time they saw us. Hundreds of young men and women, and some not so young, working 10-plus months at sea, living in cramped quarters, working as much as 12 hours a day, and FaceTiming with their families every evening that they can, from 60 different countries on one vessel, and so many more. Over and over again, we found that the readiness to love and care for others far overshadowed differences in language and background. So the world, my dear listeners, only appears to be divided. The stories we hear of partisan divisions, of violence in the streets, of isolated immigrant communities, these are greatly exaggerated versions of small, really isolated incidents. Just as the stories that the world heard of Portland being destroyed by violent clashes among activists had little to do with what was really happening in a very small part of town, the stories that we hear of distress in other parts of the world seem to have very little to do with what actually is happening in people's lives and hearts. We spoke with people launching businesses in foreign countries, speaking other languages, building a life for themselves and their families while caring for and supporting more friends and family back home, as humanity has done for thousands of years. We listened to the stories of people whose lives have been turned upside down by politicians and bankers, but whose faith and hope have not been destroyed and who are building new lives, working with the folks around them, and being open to the possibilities in their new situations. We connected with people who are bringing a higher consciousness into their communities and with their businesses. And everywhere, we saw how the World Wide Web of the Internet is connecting and informing and uniting people in a way that has never been possible for humanity before. People from all over the world sang the same songs, watched the same films, and knew many of the same stories. This is not the world our parents and grandparents, and too many of our political leaders, grew up in. This new world, defined in large part by American values, films, and music, is one in which individuals feel empowered to create a life that works for themselves and their communities, regardless of their class or race. It's a world in which creative problem-solving is encouraged rather than squashed, and in which shared feelings of connection override apparent differences in skin color, language, and religion. It's a very different kind of world. The divisions are dissolving around us, in spite of the political and financial gains to be made by encouraging them. Creativity is actually on the increase. People are using the technologies as they are emerging in highly creative ways, and mostly they're using them to connect with others. Small businesses, family-owned businesses, friends working together are growing up everywhere as families and friends and communities find ways to support themselves in this new world by connecting with others and providing for their needs. And it's true. The politicians and the bankers and the companies that those people encourage and support continue to exploit people and extract resources from the earth in ways that are damaging to the earth and its people, which is sad, and it can be disheartening. But it is no longer the norm. The 75 years of living that way are almost over, and the 6,000 years of expecting to be able to live that way is very quickly dissolving around us. It's clear to me that the consciousness of humanity is on the rise. The willingness to live and work from mutual respect and curiosity rather than righteous ignorance is rapidly becoming the norm around the world. How I can say that from just visiting one region is because of all the people from around the world I got to interact with, and because this World Wide Web we call the Internet is working really well to connect us all. And I, for one, am very grateful and hopeful because it is so. Well, if you just tuned in, you are listening to Noetic Moments, the show that explores what consciousness is, what it does, and how our lives could be better if we understood it more fully. I'm Ruth Miller, and that sound tells me we need to look at what's going on in the world, what's being published, and what you, the listeners, are curious about. The book I want to talk about today is actually one I wrote. 30 years ago, I set down on paper my vision of a world that could work ecologically, socially, and economically for all humanity. A few years back, I updated and published it, calling it Home, Creating Humanity's Future. The book is divided into several sections and starts with how we might organize land so that people could live in a way that supports them and their families and work together in small communities and larger communities. The assumption is that clusters of housing about the size of villages and small towns work better for humanity than large cities, and even the metropolitan areas that are limited, one per geographical region, are organized as villages around commercial and university and healing centers. Another section looks at the economics of how people might live together if they weren't based on a debt economy or a cash economy or with a central bank. How would it work that we could exchange goods and services in a way that was empowering and supportive of everyone involved? Yet another section of the book looks at alternative political structures to maximize the power of a representative government rather than an oligarchy or autocracy, which has been the tendency for the last several thousand years. Another section looks at education. What kinds of things might want to be offered at different ages and stages of development? And what kinds of access do we want in small towns and in the larger world to the information that is available everywhere? The book is created for those who are looking at the possibility of how they could move in the direction of a world that truly works for all of us. That is Home, Creating Humanity's Future, by me, Ruth L. Miller, and it's published by Portal Center Press. It's available in all the usual places and as an ebook on Amazon and on the Gaia Living Systems Institute website, where there are links to a series of classes that I taught that explain how we can get to a culture that works for all. That site is GaiaLivingSystems.org, and Gaia is spelled G-A-I-A. If you're interested at all in a sustainable future for humanity, you might want to check that site out. It's loaded with videos and a list of books and other resources that can help people shift into a state of consciousness in which working with natural processes and inner wisdom can help us all live a healthier, more sustainable life, regardless of what's going on around us. Now, while I was out and about, I continued to track what's going on in the research, and I was delighted to find that a group of researchers have established that electrical fields are indeed involved in the transmission of information within the brain, and that these fields make it possible for the brain to make more new combinations than the simple synaptic connections would allow. This study, published in Neuroimage, was building on earlier research published last year by MIT in that same journal, Neuroimage. They describe it as using two macaques playing a game while their brain activities were recorded. The researchers suggest that the orchestra is a model. The neurons are the players, and the electric field is the conductor. Isn't that cool? The electric field, the field of electromagnetic energy that we've been calling the mind, they're seeing it as the conductor with the individual neurons simply transmitting specific notes. They say, as the brain strives to hold information in mind, such as the list of groceries we need to buy on the way home, the study suggests that the most consistent and reliable representation of that information is not the electrical activity of the individual neurons involved, but an overall electric field they collectively produce. Indeed, whenever neuroscientists have looked at how brains represent information in working memory, they've found that from one trial to the next, even when repeating the same task, the participation and activity of individual cells varies. Well, this means, step by step, the experiments are coming closer to establishing how the field that we call mind and the structure we call brain are interacting. This is good news indeed. Well, that's it for today's show. We are out of time for today, but remember, you can continue the exploration on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where there's a list of the titles and other resources we refer to on the show, along with archived past shows, and where you can send me your comments and questions, which I will do my best to get answered the next time we're on the air. For now, thanks for joining me here on Noetic Moments, recorded in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon. And have a wonderful week.
You've been listening to Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments. This program is produced in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in beautiful Florence, Oregon, supported by you, our listeners. Our theme music is Tumbling Planets, composed and performed by Jeff Lovejoy. To hear this program again or learn more about Noetic Sciences, search our website, www.noeticmoments.org.
Well, hello there. This is Ruth Miller again, and I am adding to this program a little announcement. I'll be teaching a class in Florence on Saturday, June 10th, 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. The focus is on economics, how we can thrive regardless of all these talks about inflation and recession and possible depression and values of stocks and values of whatever. The class is going to be called Metaphysical Economics, and it talks about how our personal economics, our personal economy, does not have to be tied to the larger economy happening around us. I hope you will join me on Saturday, June 10, at 1 p.m. in the Florence Unitarian Universalist Fellowship Hall. That's out there north of town at the Heceta Center, where Heceta Road comes with 101. Look forward to seeing you then. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.